What if I were to suggest that you play a key role in the awakening world? And that you are watching this because you have heard the call. We can start right now by opening our hearts and minds. Welcome to the awakening world.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Awakening World. I'm your host, Love Coach Scott Thomas. And tonight it's another edition of Authors That We Love. And I'm really excited because we've got one of my favorite colleagues, Kurt Johnson, is with us. This is the hardest working man on the planet. It is extraordinary how much Kurt does. I first met him through the Evolutionary Leaders Network. He is the man who he's behind so many books, so many publications, so many projects. He is the person who kind of oversees all of the different synergy circles within the Evolutionary Leaders Network. He's now at the core of creating a media collaboratory that is bringing together a lot of different organizations. Kurt, people think I do a lot, but all hail Kurt, you take the cake. And I see rocket ships and hearts and all sorts of exciting stuff coming up there. So for people who aren't familiar with Light and on Light Press, tell us a little bit about that publication arm and that part of your world.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. So I'm assuming you can hear me fine.
Yeah, you sound great.
The Light on Light Press came about after the Evolutionary Leaders won their Gold Nautilus Award for their book, Our Moment of Choice, Evolutionary Visions for a Conscious Future. And what Bob Atkinson and I realized is that we had all the elements, having done that book with Simon & Schuster, to actually do a publishing company of our own. And as many of you know, Light on Light had been doing all of our e-publications for the Evolutionary Leaders and other communities, which were all free at ISSUU. And actually, I'll just kind of ask Scott to put that link into the chat. That's just issuu.com/lightonlight. And so actually, when we started the company, that's almost 3 years ago, we've been really, really lucky. We've won 9 Nautilus Awards, and we've won Nautilus's Best in Small Press in 2024. And a lot of these will be really close to home for a lot of you in the audience because we published the Holo Movement book. We're working on the Holo Movement book in Spanish now. We published the autobiography for Humanities Team. And of course, everybody here is always involved with Humanities Team and the Global Oneness Summit. And we published all of the books for Ervin Laszlo going into his programs on the Great Upshift. And we actually have publications coming out this next year with the Galileo Commission, and probably with Ions, and with Rian Eisler, The Power of Partnership. And so we're on a roll because we were founded to do books about interspirituality, the relationship of all the world spiritual traditions, and on the paradigm shift. So we're all about the paradigm shift. So we've done very well. We feel very lucky. Everybody works for free. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit. we're actually able to do so much because nobody gets paid. Everybody's a volunteer. So that's kind of it. It's been quite a run. And what's great is that we get to work with all of these people who have really major ideas for change, and they actually want to be able to publish exactly what they'd like to say and not what a publisher tells them that they would like them to do. So that's Light on Light, and actually that's at lightonlight.us. That's our website. Yeah, there are all the free e-publications. And then if Scott can take us just to lightonlight.us, you'll also then in a second see all of the publications there. There we go. So there are the ones that won Best in Small Press. Those are the Irvin Laszlo books. And right below it, if you scroll a little bit more, you'll see, yay. So these are the 2 volumes on interspirituality, which came out in October on the 25th anniversary of the book that named interspirituality, which I'll say more about in just a moment when Scott and I start to talk about that, The Mystic Heart, Discovering a Universal Spirituality in the World's Religion. So that's who Light on Light is. I think all of you know us. We all know you. We've been here many times. Awakening World is kind of like one of our backyards. So it's great to be here again.
Great. So let's just start with the term interspirituality. Now, we recently, earlier this year, did a show on interfaith spirituality. So how would you define, at least as these 2 volumes are written, what interspirituality is?
Okay, so I actually say 2 things on that because you kind of framed it in that way. Interfaith to interspirituality is kind of like a journey from the head to the heart. Interfaith was really about knowing about other faiths, having tolerance for them, having appreciation for them, but it didn't go to the level of sinking in to what they all had so deeply in common. So what Wayne Teasdale did in his book, it's all in his title of his book, The Mystic Heart, Discovering a Universal Spirituality in the World's Religions. So that discovering of the universal spirituality that's residing in all of the world religions is what interspirituality is. And there's 3, not 2, 3 really famous quotations of Wayne, they're very short, that really make that super clear. The first one is when he said that the only viable religion for the 3rd millennium is spirituality itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said the real religion of all the world can be said to be spirituality itself. And the last one actually is so close to home for this program, Awakening World, because this is where he said, we must understand at the most elemental level that the definitive revolution is the awakening of humankind. So that really, I think, nails it. And the last thing I wanted to say about this, because as you know, Scott gave me clues on what we needed to cover here, is that the question really that interspirituality asks today, us sitting here in the midst of everything going on in the world, is simply this. And this has also been said by Teasdale and by Ken Wilber. What will humanity do now that all of the wisdom resources of all the spiritual traditions of history are all on the table, all at the same time? What will we do with that? We are in a really unique position. And so when we get into talking about these books, that actually explains why the first volume is the heritage, where this all came from, and the second is the future, where we would all hope that this can go. And certainly the guests that I brought on today, who are really elders and leaders in this whole phenomenon for a quarter of a century, can help us talk about that.
Beautiful. So just before we bring on our guests, let's always start our show with some music. And we are blessed to have our house musical artist, Omashar, with us to get things moving and grooving, and his dynamic duo partner, Desiree. Welcome to you both, and welcome. Happy Wednesday to both of you.
Happy Wednesday indeed, and namaste everybody who's watching on Facebook and YouTube, and our broadcast partners. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to our sharing tonight. And so the theme in my heart is what if, and with that cunning lead in, Here we go. What if we could find a way to wipe away all tears and fears, all broken hearts, to clear the way for a brand new start? Now that we see and know the way to lift our day and shine the light for all to see, the way back home and the way to be free. Let our love lead the way. Let the light shine through all. Let our hearts and minds be free. As we rise up from the fall, there is a way to see again, to be again, to know the truth, to smile again. With an open heart we feel safe again. And now that we're free and we see that the way is to let our love show us a new way to be, and we relish the chance to be part of the dance that will recreate the world anew. What if we could find a way to wipe away all tears and fears, all broken hearts, to clear the way for a brand new start? Let our love lead the way. Let the light shine through all. Let our hearts and minds be free. As we rise up from the fall, there is a way to see again, to be again, to know the truth, to smile again. With an open heart we feel safe again.
You go to gallery view. That particular song has almost a melancholy feeling. Do you all feel that when it has
It's plaintive. It's designed to sort of just get right into the heart and be there. So yeah, it's what if. It's all about us coming together. And what if we could actually create a world which is free? So, yeah.
Well, Kurt Johnson is one of the main people that I know who's doing that. He really is. And we will have 2 more numbers from Omashar. And thank you, brother. Thank you so much. And thank you, Desiree. And thank you, the Global Peace Tribe cheerleading and dance squad. Appreciate all of you. Kurt, you have brought with you 2 wonderful people, and I'd love for you to introduce them.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, let me just say a little bit more about the 2 volumes. I'm going to put into the chat the link to the page that actually has everybody who's in both volumes, because you'll see that there's an opening message by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There's a foreword by Matthew Fox, who was one of the 5 namers of the interspiritual paradigm, along with Thomas Merton and Thich Nhat Hanh and Raymond Banneker and others, and the afterword by Ken Wilber, and then the full list of 120 global spiritual leaders that are in these 2 volumes talking about what this all means at this time. And we actually joke that we couldn't really have an advanced praise section in these books because there was nobody who wasn't in the books. There was nobody to ask. So we were so lucky. That's why we ended up doing 2 volumes. We started with 1, and the global response for everyone talking about this at this time was so big we went to 2. So I'll put that link in right now. That's where the most comprehensive information is on both volumes, and also all of the links, which includes Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, Canada, all the other ways that this book can get around. So that said, I am really pleased to be able to introduce as the guest tonight 2 people who have been doing this work for a quarter of a century and really have a legacy, and they're all over in these volumes. And what I'm going to do is just tell you about each of them, and then I am going to start discussing with each of them some of the central questions that we have. So first, let me tell you about Diane Berke. So Reverend Diane Berke is a visionary spiritual leader, author, and educator. Ordained in 1988, she is the founder of the One Spirit Learning Alliance, and of course with that, the One Spirit Interfaith Seminary that many of you know well, and a widely respected pioneer in interfaith interspiritual education. With a strong background in psychology and rich understanding of diverse spiritual traditions, Diane's teachings seamlessly bridge the psychology and spiritual realms. And she's known for her clarity and wisdom, her sincerity and depth of compassion, and her ability to create welcoming learning spaces and deep inner exploration for companioning people in living lives of service, purpose, and meaning. She's a licensed mental health counselor in New York, a certified Parker Palmer facilitator in circles of trust, and a co-creator of pro-social spirituality for pro-social world. So welcome, Diane.
Right.
And let me then bring on Patrick. Patrick Carolan is a Roman Catholic activist, organizer, writer, speaker, and storyteller. He's the co-founder and co-director of Catholics Vote Common Good, and he has served as the executive director of the Franciscan Action Network. He's one of the most accomplished writers on the legacy of Pope Francis. And he served as co-founder also of the Global Catholic Climate Movement and the Faithful Democracy Coalition. He previously was a union organizer and served as president of a state public employees union. Resides in Connecticut with his family, which includes 2 of his own, 2 adopted, and several other children that they have brought into their fold. So that's who we have here. And what I wanted to ask them, so that you're not just listening to me and you can listen to them, is really simple. Given everything that we've already said about interspirituality, and you guys are all over these 2 volumes about this 25-year history and when it goes from here, it really is asking each of you, what is this phenomenon to you? What is interspirituality to you in the biggest sense? And because I know you're both activists, what does it cause you to do? So let's start with that, and let's start with Diane, since you hear a woman's voice instead of me clamoring away.
Thank you, Kurt. When I think of interspirituality, one of the things you quoted from the Mystic Heart earlier is really the heart and soul of it for me, which is that the necessary revolution in the service of the evolution of human consciousness is the spiritual awakening of humanity. And that basically the great wisdom traditions have all offered us ways of moving in the direction of that awakening, of tapping into that deep knowing of the unity of being, of the interconnectedness of all of life, and that we can make use of all of those different approaches, perspectives, practices in order to further that awakening that will impact us not only individually, but as importantly, collectively as well. I have found myself thinking a lot in the last couple of days in preparation for this about Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching that the Buddha of the future will be the Sangha, that it's not going to be, as is sometimes described, the sage on the stage, but our capacity to create community and tap into collective wisdom. The other thing that's really been with me is something that Peace Pilgrim said many, many, many years ago, which was the key word for our time is practice. We already have all the light we need. We already have all of the understanding we need. What we need to do now is put it into practice. And for me, part of that, what that means is taking these teachings much more seriously and much more deeply than we have up until now, and bringing that commitment to transformative consciousness into every activity and every relationship and every ordinary moment of our day-to-day lives. I think that's what I feel called to these days, and feel like we're being collectively called to as well.
Yeah, amen. So, Patrick, same question. As a 25 or a year more veteran, what does this all mean to you, and what does it cause you to do and advise others to do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and thank you for having me follow Diane, because I could just say I agree with everything Diane said. But when I think of interspirituality, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is what Thomas Berry wrote. And as you know, Thomas Berry was a Catholic priest, and he wrote that we go forth with a singular spirituality or we perish in the desert. When Thomas Berry wrote that, he wasn't talking about how we practice our spirituality. He wasn't talking about, do we celebrate on Friday night or Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning? Do we go to synagogue or church? How we hold our hands? He wasn't talking about any of that. He was talking about our core beliefs, and do we see ourselves in relationship to all of creation? And are we seeing ourselves in right relationship with all of creation? You mentioned I was active. I worked for the Franciscans for 10 years. And a lot of my spirituality is centered around the spirituality of St. Francis of Assisi. And, when you think about it, 800 years ago, St. Francis of Assisi was talking about this exact same thing, about the whole idea of the interconnectedness of all creation, and the idea that we're not here to go there, wherever there might be. We have a lot of our religions that teach us we're here to get to heaven. St. Francis said, no, we're here to create heaven here. And, for me, interspirituality is the action to create heaven here. And how we practice our spirituality, I think it's all good. It's wonderful how people practice their spirituality. I don't know that mine's right for me. Diane's is probably right for her, to move forth. So it's not about any of that. It's about just how we, first of all, practice it. It's not that, because for too many of us, we just sort of talk about it. We don't actually do it. And then it's how it transforms us. If our spirituality isn't transforming us, then you really need to go find a new spirituality, a new way of doing it. Nothing personal, but seriously, if you're sitting in a, church on Sunday or Friday or Saturday and you're not being transformed, then there's something wrong with what you're really doing. I have a good friend who was a Catholic priest. He was my Catholic priestess at my parish for many years. And he used to get up at the end of Mass sometimes and he'd say, I hope I've made you feel uncomfortable, because if I haven't, I'm not doing my job. And we never transform in our comfort zone. So interspirituality is about us stepping outside of that comfort zone and really looking at all of us as the oneness. And again, I'll get back to St. Francis of Assisi and the early Franciscans, and it was a brilliant, brilliant theologian and philosopher in the 13th century. John Duns Scotus was one of the most brilliant theologians I've ever read. And he talked about what he described as the univocity of being, the whole understanding of the uniqueness of each of us coming together to form the oneness of all of us. And that's what interspirituality is about, is forming that oneness of all of us, and not just us as humans, of all creation. And the other part of it is getting there and it's something that St. Francis often talked about. Although I will have to say St. Clare talked about it more, but we being good Catholics, we gave all the credit to St. Francis because he was the man and not to St. Clare. So I like to give her the credit. But she talked about seeing the Christ. And when I look at you, I should see Christ. And when you look at me, you should see Christ. And again, if I'm not seeing Christ in you and you're not seeing Christ in me, however we define Christ, it's not a religious Christ, it's a universal Christ. Then we really, and Francis actually said this, you need to reimagine your spirituality if you're not seeing Christ in the other. And he talked about when you walk down the street and you see a suffering person, a poor person, a hungry person, you should see the suffering Christ in that person. And then you should take action. It wasn't just about seeing it, but taking action to do something to relieve that suffering, to help that person and carry that forward. So that for me is what interspirituality is all about. Nothing to do with how we practice our religion. It's all about how we live our spirituality every moment of every day.
Yeah, amen. And I just noted Scott has asked everybody to start putting questions and comments in, and I'm going to rely on Scott to tell us where we're at on time. When Diane was speaking, I was thinking about very often you see on TV where they say vote as if your life depended on it. And I think the corollary to that is live your life as if your life depended on it, because for darn sure right now it does. There's an amazing synchronicity I want to mention about our gathering tonight, and that is that we discovered that your guests on Saturday night are going to be from the Indigenous Peoples Group, also in volume 2 of the volumes. And actually, I'm going to be joining them on Monday, the 22nd, for the group. Actually, it was about 10 Indigenous leaders that did the section on restoring the balance and reciprocity in our lives that are in volume 2, and I'll be joining them. So I'll put the link to John Raymer's One World and their Enlightening Our Way Together. I'm sure many of you are here already involved with that, but I'll make sure that that link is in the chat when Omashar is playing again, and we'll take it from there. So one thing I wanted to do to kind of turn the corner here and involve Scott as well, and then back to our guests, is that we've really asked the question now, what are the drum beats for this time that are most relevant to all of us? Because everybody here has talked about the landscape for them of what's relevant. And we really nailed it down to four things that I think all of you are going to agree on. And the first one is, again, interspirituality itself. What is the relationship of all the world's spiritualities in moving toward this better world of the heart that we all imagine? That's number one. And number two, then, and this is what Patrick pointed to as well, is eco-spirituality and everything that goes with eco-spirituality, not just standard eco-spirituality from Thomas Berry, but all things of First Peoples, indigenous wisdom, reciprocity, Mother Earth, divine feminine, Gaia, everything that has to do with that. That's number two. Number three is a cosmology of understanding holographic principles, non-locality entanglement, and our exploration of the subtle realms, all the dimensions of love and healing and compassion, all of the things of the subtle realms. And then the last is, this is what we just did the summit on recently with Rian Eisler, how we move our planet from domination consciousness and domination culture to partnership consciousness and partnership culture. So those four drum beats. And what I wanted to do then here is throw that out to Diane, Patrick, and Scott. Where do you land on those four drum beats? Because those are big drum beats.
Well, I'll go first this time, Diane, and I'll talk about the last one because I think I think about that a lot, and I think a lot of it centers around, we have this concept, and no matter what your religious beliefs are or tradition is, we have this concept, this idea that we have to first be in right relationship with God. And, we spend a lot of time, whether it's going to church or being contemplative or whatever it is we do, so we can be in right relationship with God, the universe, however you phrase that. And then after we're in right relationship with God, then we can move on and start talking about being in right relationship with creation. We kind of have it backwards because we first have to be in right relationship with all of creation and understand what that means. And then when we're in right relationship with creation, we'll already be in right relationship with God. So we don't really have to spend any time doing that. So I look at it from that perspective of how can we be in right relationship with all of creation? And again, I'll get back to St. Francis of Assisi. I have friends who are friars. I have one friend in particular who told me his mission in life is to go around to all the statues of St. Francis and knock the birds off, because it gives us just this whole misrepresentation of who Francis really was and what Francis really believed in. And Francis, he would go out and he'd preach the gospel to the birds and to the trees. And somebody asked him, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Because God told me to preach the gospel to my brothers and sisters, and these are my brothers and sisters." Mm-hmm. And he truly believed that these are my brothers and sisters, all of creation. So we have to get to that point of where we see all of creation as we're one with all of creation. And it doesn't mean we're all the same. It doesn't mean we all hold our hands the right way. It just means that we are one, as Scotus wrote 700, 800 years ago. We're unique, but in our uniqueness with all of creation, we form the oneness of all creation. And so I'll leave it at there and then let Diane and others talk about that and others, and then I can get back to the others later.
Yeah, Diane and Scott, where do you land?
Well, yeah, I could say what Patrick said after I spoke earlier, which is I agree with everything he said. But I want to come at this a little bit sideways, if I can. And I'd like to do that by going back to Omashar's opening song. And Scott used the word a bit melancholy to describe it, and Omashar talked about that quality of what if. And I think that, for so many people now, that's a very real question. And even can we? We have this deep intuitive sense of I think what Charles Eisenstein said, the more beautiful world we know is possible, and whether we can, in fact, move toward that and actualize that, or if the gap between where we are and what we aspire to um, has become too great to come back from. And Parker Palmer, who is really one of my most important teachers, talks about our ability to live in what he calls the tragic gap, which is the difference between how things are and, again, what we intuitively sense is potential for us at our um, highest aspiration and our highest expression. And and I think right now a lot of people are struggling with the experience of being in that tragic gap. And especially, after the events of this past weekend coming one right after another, it's easy for people to begin to fall into despair or to move in the direction of despair. And one of the real questions is how do we not turn to despair? How do we find the energy and the passion and the stamina to keep moving in the direction of the world we want to see? And that's really where a lot of my energy and my focus is right now. I was speaking to a friend this morning who, when I asked her how she would frame the time that we're in, without hesitation, she said, heartbreak. That it's a time of heartbreak. And it made me think of something else that Parker teaches, which is that when the heart breaks, it can break in two different ways. It can shatter and completely break apart into shards, or it can break open. And the question now is, how do we allow the heart to break open in compassion, in tenderness, in the direct experience of love for all creation, as Patrick was talking about? And how do we create the conditions in community where those aspects of our human nature can be encouraged, can be nurtured, can flourish and thrive?
Yeah, and that's exactly after Omashar's song. When we come back again, that's where we're going to be going, is talking about community and then talking about activism that erupts from that support of the community. There is this term, the tragedy of the commons, and all you have to do is turn on TV and see what's going on in the Congress. Tragedy of the commons simply means that humanity's record in being able to work together has never been that good. And it's really what Rian Eisler calls the partnership consciousness deficit, that we easily move toward division, circling the wagons, feeling different. We don't easily move toward partnership. And that's why this awakening that we talk about is so important, because actually the core of awakening is that there is no other. Everything is seamlessly interconnected. There is no other. The other is you. And that awakening then allows that altruistic behavior, which serves without any desire for a reward or any thought of reward. And we know we have that potential because we're surrounded by people in our lives. That's the good news, who live that way, and we know it's possible. And just to mention that pro-social spirituality, which Diane's been a pioneer in, and she'll probably want to say more about this down the line, really comes from the Nobel Prize winning design principles of Elinor Ostrom which address the tragedy of the commons. But it's a list, and a list is different, as you just said, than actually acting that way. It's one thing to know the list. It's another thing to be able to live the list. So anyway, Scott, you've been sitting here patiently.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's wonderful to hear what you all have to say. I've got a couple of comments, and then I want to read some comments and questions that have come into the chat box. But going back, I think something I always like to point out when we talk about seeing the Christ in all, one of the most important passages in the Bible for me is, I am the way, the truth, the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. And tragically, it's been interpreted and used by organized religion to turn it into, coming through the church. But of course, I think we all recognize that really it's referencing the Christ consciousness. His name was not Jesus Christ. His name was, Yeshua, or if you wish, Jesus of Nazareth, who attained the Christ consciousness, which is available to all of us. So I always like to remind people of that particular piece. I'm going to read some of the comments coming in. DR has been talking about the timeline shifts happening, and I'd be curious as to what your thoughts are about timeline shifts, if that fits into some of your perspective. Also, Diane, in terms of the suffering and finding that balance, I think part of our job is to, on the one hand, have absolute empathy for the very real suffering, while on the other hand, also putting attention on the extraordinary work going on in the world. The books that we're celebrating today. There are so many extraordinary people doing wonderful things. And since the mainstream media doesn't cover that, that's why in my little way, I'm doing the Awakening World twice a week.
Thank you for doing that.
We are getting inspiration. We are seeing, the positive things that are happening. And we need to have both, not spiritually bypassing the suffering, but not dropping into despair. Empathy. I love this one. If you take a look at, everything in this life, there's a pole, there's a spectrum, right? So on one end of the spectrum is apathy. I don't care. But on the other end of the spectrum is sympathy. Oh, pity, falling into despair, you poor thing. But in the middle between those two is empathy, right here in the middle of our being, our heart. And in empathy, we can feel and acknowledge and have compassion for the suffering, but not dropping into despair. Right? So, and that's Marshall Rosenberg taught me that one. Sympathy, apathy, in the middle is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's hear from some of our wonderful chat boxers.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Diane and Patrick take the lead, because you're used to hearing me, but you don't get to hear them.
Okay, well, if you get a burst of genius, don't hold back.
And I'm sorry, Scott, can I just say one thing in response? That's it's sort of a fine point that His Holiness the Dalai Lama made in the week that he spent with Desmond Tutu in Dharamsala. And what he said is, empathy is good, but empathy is not enough. What we need is compassion. He said, empathy, you see the man under the rock and you say, oh, it's really painful to be trapped under a rock. Compassion sends you over to the rock to try to get him out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
No, thank you. Thank you. Okay, going to read some comments and then got some questions for you. Susan Bloomquist writes, I agree. I hear more encouraging words of meaning than ever before. Ayada also says, I agree, to also understand that these tragedies are literally breaking our collective heart open. Rumi's poetry is very much about that. Not all at once, but it is steadily building. I see signs of it regularly. Dr. Laura writes, I think it would be unwise not to understand that there will be great change on this planet and great heartbreak because people might be confused and in chaos. DR writes, yes, this empathy is part of the transformation. Eleanor Joy writes, in my world over the past 20 to 30 years, none of these conversations and observations did not exist. It's so encouraging to hear all of this. I hold fast to the hope of the future. People have a lot of muck covering their beautiful heart. I practice seeing their golden heart beneath the yuck, including for myself. Beautiful. Connie Baxter writes, trust the process with bold, committed action. I'm going to say that again. That's powerful. Trust the process with bold, committed action. Ayada writes, I've been dealing with a lot of fear and despair for our world this year. Yet recently I felt things shift, an upswelling of courage in my own heart and soul, partly from seeing so much courage all around me, along with inspired action and results. It may not be a massive wave yet, but I sense it becoming one. Reverend Jeffrey Colbrook writes, we are in the partnership of a new paradigm network. And I do know that there was a question that I'd seen up here earlier. Another one from Ayada. I think we already are moving towards the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Every time I start to feel a sense of hopelessness, signs that the world is showing up. Right. And where was that question? Reverend, we have the Mystic Monastery, Reverend Jerry Anderson with us. I feel the most critical difference with religions compared to the indigenous story is they were never removed from the garden. That's beautiful. Here's the question. Susan Bloomquist writes, does this theme of right relationship with earth and creation flow through all religions? So here's a question for you.
I'll jump in first. I have no idea because I don't really know all religions. It flows through Christianity. It certainly flows through Islam. It flows through Hindu. It flows through Buddhist. It flows through Jewish. So, most of the major, and it also flows through the indigenous cultures, that whole idea. It's not anything different there. So, and also I did want to comment on something you had said, Scott, about the Christ. And I think something we have to keep in mind is, and this is particularly in Christianity, I often ask the question and people, do you think Jesus came with a building plan or an evacuation plan? Because most of our theology is centered around an evacuation plan. We're here to get there, wherever there is. Everything we do here is important only insofar as it helps us get to heaven. And yet everything Jesus talked about was creating heaven here, not getting to heaven. And so we really need, and our activism has to be centered around just the whole transformative process so we can transform away from some of. And again, another part of it is the whole idea, and my friend Elia Delia writes about this a lot, that our sacred stories are beautiful stories, no matter what faith tradition. They're wonderful stories. But we have to remember that when our sacred stories were written, we had a whole different understanding of the cosmos than we have today. So, to use an old Irish expression, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know if it's Irish, but my mother was Irish and she used to say that. But, we want to hold on to those sacred stories, but we really have to reimagine those sacred stories in terms of the understanding we have of the cosmos today. And that's when we start to transform and move forward. And I know some of your comments, people were talking about being hopeful. I'm a very hopeful person. I'm a resurrection person. I think we're really on the cusp of change. But we also have to remember that whenever change happens, there's going to be those people who don't want to change, and they're going to start circling the wagons around us. And that's where we have to be careful and really come together and focus our energies together so that the change can happen in a good way. We've seen change throughout civilization happen. Some of it hasn't been really good change. And so
Yeah, I'm going to make a couple quick comments. I'm going to throw it to Diane, but to comment across this landscape, one thing Marianne Eisler says a lot about the scriptures, this goes to the question of all the world's religions, is in this day and age, we have to, when we look at the scriptures of all the world's religions, we have to start to sort the wheat from the chaff. And the wheat is the deeper understanding of love and compassion and unity and all of that. And the chaff is what got written into it by the sociological circumstances of the time, and also the political things that were behind organized religions, of which then, created division, created hate, created so on. And so that's why even in the world today, you see Ukraine Orthodox Church on the Ukrainian side and Russian Orthodox Church on the Russian side in a war, which makes no sense relative to the values that are underneath all the world's religions. So that, unfortunately, that mixture of wheat and chaff is there in all the scriptures. And part of that is what the one person said in the chat about the dominion thing.
yes.
That word dominion came from a time where life was so tough on this planet that to have dominion over your situation was a very high value and value target. Now that we live in much more comfort, at least in certain parts of the world, then we can talk about care and stewardship and not having left the garden and so on. So we're maturing, across all of those things.
Mhm.
So, Diane, your comments on what's come through.
Yeah. I have an image that has come to me over the last day or so in terms of this conversation tonight is something that Andrew Harvey writes about in his book, The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism. And it's a way of holding and framing what we're seeing on the planet right now. And in that book, he tells a story of being in Konya in Turkey at Rumi's tomb. And he meets an older gentleman at the tomb and they begin to talk. And the older gentleman tells him a story about something that had happened about 10 years earlier, which is that his wife had sent him out to bring home a loaf of bread or something. And he took the long way around to the bakery, and that took him back to Rumi's tomb. And as he was there at that sacred site, he began hearing this blood-curdling screaming. And he saw a woman lying in the pavement, just screaming and agony, just agonizing pain. And he immediately thought, oh my God, she's been stabbed, she's been raped, something terrible has happened. And he went over to, to try to help her and comfort her. And suddenly recognized that she had opened her legs and that what was actually occurring is that she was in labor and she was in the process of giving birth. And so the older gentleman went and found a woman who knew how to be a midwife, how to deliver a baby, and the baby was born and was healthy. And I think that, we often forget that the birthing process can be agonizing at times and can even appear that things are dying. And it actually, I think what's important to recognize, because I think we could say that we are in a time of the birthing of the possibility of new consciousness, transformed consciousness.
Yes.
It's also, I think, important to recognize that it's also a time of danger. Certainly with medical advances, it doesn't happen so often now, but for most of human history, the number of women who died in childbirth was a very, very large, significant percentage. And so I think holding the tension of both recognizing that this is a time where there is a great deal of suffering on the planet, and also holding the perspective that we may be in the birthing pangs, the labor pangs of a new possibility for humanity and a new possibility for creation itself is a good way to hold all of what's happening.
Absolutely. We
Yes.
frequently enjoy, I think Greg Braden first started presenting it, from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And caterpillar literally consumes so much food that it stuffs itself to death, just like we've been stuffing ourselves with, to death with over buying and everything. And then as it dies, imagine the confusion, it's dying and turns into this goo, and the imaginal cells find each other and coalesce. And I think all of us that are doing this work are imaginal cells of the new paradigm. And we're finding each other and, oh my God, you've got this piece and I've got that, and it's exciting as we come together to create the new world, to create the awakening world, to create the new earth, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and it's interesting also at this time that we're right in all this disclosure moment as well. Not only this probably Oscar-winning documentary, but the Steven Spielberg film that'll be coming on its heels in the summer, and this recognition not only that we're not alone, but we're dealing with all kinds of multidimensional cosmic companions, not just folk that might arrive in something that lands on the lawn and have to knock on your door to come in, but those who don't even need to do that, they can come right through the wall, just like Jesus with his resurrected body was able to do as well. And when we start to understand the cosmos in that way, that's so uplifting relative to the place of our planet, our people. So, and if we could just understand that, then we probably would not have all of the unkindness and cruelty and war that erupts. And in the second part after Omashar, we're going to be talking about community and activism and how we gin up together this energy, not only to believe in these possibilities, but as Patrick said, to then help make them happen, to be the midwives of that very process that we're talking about.
And as you just said, we are at that time for Omashar. We're at the mid-show point, so you all can get a cup of tea or whatever you might need. And I'm going to turn things over to our beloved brother Omashar and his partner Tiara. Desiree.
away. The love in our hearts will melt the darkest day. So when it seems that you're alone and the fears knock at your door, remember I am just a breath away. You are my brightest star. You've just forgotten who you are. Remember there is nothing in the way. So just know there really is a plan. The sun will always shine, and with your hand in mine, all heaviness fades away. The love in our hearts will melt the darkest day. So when you feel like giving up, when you feel like letting go, remember I am just a breath away. And just know there really is a plan. The sun will always shine, and with your hand in mine, all heaviness fades away. The love in our hearts will melt the darkest day. The love in our hearts will melt the darkest day. The love in our hearts will melt the darkest day.
Gallery view. And, you know, it's amazing how Omashar just always chooses the perfect songs for the theme, for the show, and what we were just talking about. So amazing. I even wrote that perfect song for this conversation. Thank you, Omashar. DR, I've been singing this to myself for weeks now. So yeah, it's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Scott. What a profound show we have tonight, and what amazing guests we have. I'm just like crying with joy somehow. There it is.
Good. Well, thank you. I want to make a couple of important announcements, and then, of course, we'll get back to Kurt, Patrick, and Diane, and all of you. I don't know how many of you have been following, but this week was the State of the World Forum. And I really cleared as much time in my schedule as possible, and I watched probably 3/4 of the programs, and they did a terrific job. A lot of our favorites, people that have been on the show many times, like Jude Currivan, but also some new people. And so because of all the good stuff, they've been sending me the recordings each day afterwards. I just want everybody to know that we're going to have actually a very special Sacred Sunday show. So I want to make sure you all know that right now. So please put into your calendars that this Sunday, December 21st, at 11 o'clock Pacific time, Omashar and I will be with you. And we're going to do some really cool stuff. You know, our beloved friend, Summer Joy Raymer, is going to be doing a dance program on Sunday at 11 a.m. So we'll get together, we'll connect, maybe have an Omashar song, and then we'll go right into the Zoom room of Summer and dance with her for 20 minutes or so. It's a short one. Then we're going to come back, and I'm going to show some of the clips of that I've been most impressed with. There's just been some really beautiful, beautiful stuff. Vera Austin, All About Water. some fascinating stuff about neurodivergence, the woman from the telepathy tapes. So it's going to be a really wonderful show. And then we'll all connect for the Global Silent Minute, which is happening during that little 3-hour period. So please do join us on Sunday. I also want to acknowledge that we had a big passage. Many of you know by now, but some of you may not know, that Jay Mayer passed away this week. And of course, for some of you that are old timers, you remember that Jay was very, very involved with us during the Saturday Night Alive days. And so we're going to periodically be showing some of the wisdom jewels, including tonight. I'm going to show one of his wisdom jewel videos. And so on Saturday night, we have our regular show, which is going to be all about enlightening our way together. I'll talk about that later in the evening. But then we're going to have a little memorial remembrance for Jay Mayer. So I want to let people know that Saturday night's show will probably be longer than usual, or one of our longer shows, I'll say. And then finally, enlightening our world together is starting. And I know Kurt's going to have some things to say about that in a moment, but I want to just remind everybody that it's amazing what John Raymer puts together. It really is something. And there's a lot of events, and we'll talk about some of them. I'll have Kurt talk about some of them, but here's the main page. So take a look at all the different events, and it all starts tomorrow, Thursday, December 18th. If you go to oneworld.earth/events, oneworld.earth/events, and you can take a look at all the events. These are all free of charge that are taking place. And I want to especially encourage people, get out your calendars, everybody, to participate in one that's happening just before our Saturday night show. It's called Follow the Sun, and it's the kickoff of this incredible, very kind of unique passing of that's going to take place over a 24-hour period. So 4:30 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, and that'll last, just roll right from there into our Saturday Night Awakening World show. So there's a lot happening this weekend, and what an amazing time it is. It's the time of the solstice. We've got 3-Eye Atlas going to make its closest pass to the Earth. So it's an incredible time. And Kurt, this might be a good time for you to talk about your part of enlightening our world together. You need to unmute.
Yeah, and actually, because I lost some of that because of our difficulties at the beginning, I have found it again.
Okay.
See whether it's going to allow me to go where I need to go. Because there are actually 5 shifts that are talked about in the program that I'll be doing on Sunday, on Monday. On Monday at noon, I'll be joining Patricia Ann Davis and Chief Wayne Perry and John Raymer for this reprise of the points that they published in their section of Volume 2 about the wisdom that Indigenous peoples would advise for the future. And for some reason, I'm not able to scroll when I go to that page. Now I can. So let me just continue. And they had actually laid out 5 points of shift they were talking about. I'm just waiting to get there. Here they are. And I was going to mention them briefly because they also parallel, as Patrick and Diane will know, the 9 elements of a universal spirituality that Wayne Teasdale talked about. So through the eyes of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, what they're talking about, program we're doing is these 5 points. Know through yourselves, not just about yourselves. Know through ourselves, not just about ourselves. See through the eye of the whole. Unlock new pathways. Embody our role in Earth's evolution and commit ourselves to generations of regeneration. So what's interesting about that is it's such a parallel to Brother Wayne Teasdale's 9 points, which start with achieving our full moral capacity. Isn't everything that we talked about in the earlier discussion with Patrick, Diane, and Scott and I is all about achieving this potential as humans of what our real moral, full moral capacity would look like? And then down to his 9th point, which is this one, empowering the prophetic voice for justice, compassion, and world transformation. So no matter how you say this, it's all the same message. And that's what we'll be talking about on that part of enlightening our way together on the Monday program with Indigenous leaders. And I'm probably going to be able to join maybe Saturday night when they're on with you all as well.
Great. All right. Well, let's continue our conversation.
Yeah, let's bring up Patrick and Diane, and we'll. So I'm not the only mug that's on the board here.
There they are.
There they are. Yeah, now where I wanted to go with this, and it's so close to home for the Awakening World group, and that is this whole conversation of community and what real community allows you to be able to achieve. If you know Diane's history, what One Spirit was famous for, you can actually read about it in volume 1, is their creation of community where people are seen. And in being seen, they also see themselves in those ways of compassion and self-forgiveness and self-esteem and achieving potential. And of course, everything that Patrick's done in his whole life has been organizing that same potential, which he talked about so eloquently in our earlier part, which allows you then to achieve things, at the level of the collective. So I would just love to, one other thing I want to say is that there's going to be a 3rd volume to the Interspiritual volumes that's going to be on community, and it's going to be an e-volume, which will allow us plenty of room for communities to talk about themselves. And I'm going to actually issue the invitation now, since this will happen sometime in 2026, to the Awakening World family to be a part of that discussion about how you do what you do. And we can include links to music. We can include photos, because that's what you can do with ebooks. You can't do them with print volumes. And we can have a lot of communities talking about how they achieve this. So I just want to turn now to Diane and to Patrick talking about community and how it helps us achieve that full moral, individual and collective capacity and working for change.
You can go first, Diane.
Thank you, Patrick. The activist Grace Lee Boggs said that building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual. And in The Mystic Heart, Wayne was very clear that spiritual practice, particularly contemplative practice that allows us to see through the eyes of the whole, as Kurt just mentioned, is the inner technology of transformation. And so what Grace Lee Boggs is saying is that community is the collective vehicle for transformation. And in a very similar way, Bell Hooks said there is no better place to learn the art of loving than in community. I've been thinking with some friends recently, what turns a group into a community? We're part of a lot of groups in our lives. There can be groups at work, there can be neighborhood, lots of different kind of groups. But what is it that actually turns a group into a community? And I think it has very much to do with a real focus on deep, vulnerable, and authentic relationship and reciprocity. There's a beautiful story that Jack Kornfield tells. He says, there's all of these patrons are sitting at a table, and in front of each person's place, there's a modest bottle of wine. Before the meal begins, someone picks up the wine and pours it, but not into his own glass. He pours it into his neighbor's glass. And the neighbor responds by pouring his wine into the first one's glass. And from a purely economic perspective, nothing has happened. Nobody has any more wine than they had to start with. But what Jack Kornfield says is that what has happened is that a loving community has begun to be born. And that expression of reciprocity, relationship, and care for one another on practical levels as well as emotional levels, to me, are all part of what's essential in creating authentic community.
Amazing, and amazing to think that you have graduated several thousand graduates who came out of that community and experienced that. And just to say, because it'll mean meaningful, I just heard from Joanne Barrett today, who led off the community a section in volume 3 about some things that we'll be doing with her. She has the longest lasting interspiritual community among people who just live in communities on Long Island. So Patrick, over to you.
Well, thank you again, Diane, for that. It just makes my comments much easier. So I think it's important to remember that most of our sacred spiritual traditions started as small communities. And if you look at Christianity, when the time of Jesus, I often share. I think that sometimes we believe that Jesus was born, Jesus was crucified, Jesus was resurrected, and then next Sunday everybody started going to church. And that's not how Christianity started. Christianity started with small communities coming together and just the way Diane described it, caring for each other. They probably even poured wine for each other back in those days, and loving each other and knowing each other, being in relationship and so seeing each other. Unfortunately for Christianity, it turned from small communities into empire. And they completely lost the message of Jesus when they did that and forgot the message of Jesus. When St. Francis was starting the Franciscan movement, he started it again as small communities, a small group. There's 8 or 9 men that came together to live in community and to, in that community, care for each other, but then go out from that community and care for the poor and the hungry and the leper and all around. So community really is the starting point for what we're hoping going forward happens. And without community, it's never going to happen. The transformation that we hope and pray happens will never happen without community. And community can be any number of things. I recently moved, a couple of years ago, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I moved up to East Haven, Connecticut. And my wife and I moved into a small condo complex. We've never lived in a condo before. We've always lived in a house. And I discovered, and we helped create a community within this small community complex. And it's simple things like if somebody needs a ride to the airport, one of us will volunteer to take them. Or if somebody's sick, or if somebody needs their dog, somebody else in the community volunteers to help, and we all sort of look out for each other and help each other. That's a small community that's come together and is caring for each other. And then in that community, we do things like collect food for the poor and coat drives and things like that help develop community. We have to remember, though, that without that community, we're never going to transform. And, I'll connect community to activism a little bit. As Kurt mentioned, I'm a lifelong activist. I started by activism when I was in high school protesting the Vietnam War. and I organized a walkout of my high school against the Vietnam War. But our activism has to be centered around community. And it's not just a community of activists. We have to remember it's a community of all of us. And the other part of it is the community moving into activism then has to be transformative, because activism for the sake of activism is useless. And we have a lot of that today. And I know I have a lot of good friends who are wonderful people, but the activism, is for the sake of political change, not, yeah, exactly, Kurt. Not to come together and bring people together, but to separate people. And it happens on all sides. So it's not just this side or that side. We can sit here and blame that side or this side, but we're not building community. Our activism should be about building community, and small communities which can turn into larger communities. And so I think that we have to get back to that understanding. And again, it gets back to something that I had said earlier and others have said is the whole concept of being in right relationship with all creation. I find it really interesting. I'm a lifelong Catholic. I still consider myself a Catholic. And in the Catholic Church, those of you who were raised Catholic can remember Baltimore Catechism. And the question of Baltimore Catechism was, where is God? And the answer was, God is everywhere and in everything. And I remember the good Sisters of Mercy teaching me that. And then 2 weeks later, talking about how God is up here in heaven someplace and we're down here and we're separate from God. It's sort of, it's that dichotomy of how do we go from God is everywhere to God is separate from God. We have to be together, one with God, one with each other, one with community, in order to really have this transformation. And I'm a hopeful person. I said earlier, I'm a resurrection person. I'm a hopeful person. So I have a lot of hope that that's the direction that we're moving in.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly where we were going, is to the activism. And Scott, please join us, because what I want to point out is that the only article that's in both volumes, and I didn't tell the publisher of whom we are a imprint, because they would have said no, we're trying to save space. The only article that is in both volumes is Andrew Harvey's article, Father Bede's Gift to Me, The Vision of Sacred Activism. And since I knew that some people might only read one of the two books, they could get Andrew's message there. And the point is this: Andrew Harvey came out of Bede Griffiths' community in India. And Bede Griffiths was a Roman Catholic monk who then became a Hindu guru as well, and created the Christian sannyas communities, where he understood. He said, my going to India was to discover the other half of my soul. And he realized that as Father Keating said, people's worldviews were different, but their experiences were the same. And out of that Sangha came Andrew Harvey, Russell Paul, who is one of the greatest sitarists in the world, as you know, Wayne Teasdale, who we talked about, who wrote the book Naming Interspirituality, and Rupert Sheldrake, all came out of Bede Griffiths' experience of community. And it shows that they rose then to the doing something. So that's where I wanted to go next, and turn that, because I know One Spirit has done a tremendous amount in that area. I know Scott has as well. So exactly like you just said.
Before we go to the next step, I want to just read a few comments that come in that are relevant to this part before we go to the next part.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of it is around activism. Susan Woolridge writes, in my co-housing village, we bring food to whoever may be sick. We help whoever needs a ride. We cook together, do slow jam. Brought a song last night to Molly's husband, now in a care facility. Folk dance groups, et cetera, et cetera. Reverend Jeffrey writes, I think St. Francis became who he was after having a near-death experience. Is that accurate, Patrick?
Yes. I mean, St. Francis went off to fight in a war and wanted to become a knight, and got captured and spent a year in a small cell. He probably suffered from PTSD because of that, but he was in a small cell for a year until his father finally ransomed him out.
Wow. Okay. George Noble is pointing out the Essenes, and I think that's a whole conversation of what would happen if the Essene Christianity had become dominant as opposed to the Latin Christianity. That's a whole conversation to have sometime. Eleanor Joy writes, your messages, Patrick, are very refreshing.
Thank you.
Bloomquist writes, this is a great conversation. Carol Craig writes, my South County Resistance Group is an important organization in my life right now. I'm the conservation commissioner in my hometown, and I've really been in community locally, also on the social activist community in my Unitarian Universalist community. And then finally, Ayada writes, I've been an activist since my early 20s. It always seemed like a natural thing to do, helping to make the world a better place. Oh, and Karen S. writes, similar things happen in the community where I live. So just acknowledging all of our people who are doing activist work in their own ways. Back over to you, Kurt.
No, back over to everybody. So I know, again, Diane, One Spirit has quite a legacy in activism as well, as do you. So you take a turn on that one.
Yeah. What I wanted to bring into the conversation is the importance of diversity in creating community. That if you think of the natural world, if you think of ecosystems, not every part of a healthy ecosystem does the same thing. They actually all contribute their particular gifts and their particular functions. And I think that that's an important thing for us to understand as well when we think about activism, that very often we limit our notion of activism to protest, to marching in the streets, to going to rallies, those kinds of things. And that's very much some people's dharma. That's very much the expression of engagement that is authentic to their own nature. But that's only one expression. And I think that part of the times that we're living in is requesting of us that we really have respect for the many, many different ways people are called to contribute love to the world. And for me, that's really what activism comes down to. It's I choose to be a presence of love.
Yes.
I choose to be a presence of love, of healing, of blessing, of kindness, of compassion in the world. And recognizing that there are so many different ways of expressing that and so many different opportunities in the course of a single day to express that, including even, am I being a presence of love in my thoughts?
Yes.
As I watch the news, am I contributing to peace? Or through my own reactivity, am I contributing to divisiveness and separation? And so I think when we think of this, it's really multidimensional and multi-layered.
Yeah, I think you've all seen that Greg Braden's motto, which he has on all of his stationery, is from Khalil Gibran saying, work should be love in action.
Yes.
And so another kind of action or activism in that way is our storytelling.
Yes.
And when we were doing a program with Rian Eisler on women who came to full potential, we did a survey of how many movies had told that story, that the heroine was a woman who had achieved full potential out of very difficult circumstances. And the list went on and on and on. And people hadn't thought of this, that type of activism. And I think that's the type of activism with the new film Undisclosure, where even the skeptic society had to say, this is so convincing. It was funny because they said, we know this can't be true, but it's so convincing we have to figure out how they're handling their disinformation. But even that, and even Light on Light, forming itself to do books about interspirituality and paradigm shift is a form of activism because it's shifting the awareness. And actually, the program that we're doing in February on the volumes, which is being done by Temple of Understanding, United Religious Initiatives, Bede Griffiths Trust, Holo Movement, Pro Social Spirituality. We got a bunch of people involved now. That's the title, is From Awareness to Action, a conversation with interspiritual pioneers. So be on the lookout for that. That'll be after World Interfaith Harmony Week in February. So a lot happening. So
yeah, and if I could jump in, Kurt, I think Diane made a really important point. Our activism isn't just about being out on the street protesting. Very important to do things like that and be out there in these days. But our activism is, working at a soup kitchen, volunteering at a soup kitchen, or even just a simple act of kindness to a person. And I'll give you an example. I was at Costco last week with my wife. We were shopping and we were waiting in line, and there was a woman in front of us at the cashier, and she was struggling. She was clearly counting her pennies at the bottom of her purse to try to pay, and she didn't have enough money for everything she wanted to buy, so she had to put 2 items back, tomatoes and fruit. And she paid for her stuff, put the stuff in the carriage, and started walking away. And my wife turned to the cashier and said, "Put those 2 things on our tab and just give them to her." And quietly said that, didn't make any big deal, but that was activism. That simple act of kindness to that woman was activism. And, it helped the woman, I'm sure. She was able to get her. But I think it had more of an impact on the cashier. And those simple acts that we do every single day, how we relate to each other every single day is activism. How we are grateful to people who help us, or grateful to the cashier at the grocery store. Those are all being active. And so I think, we have to remember that sometimes. Some of us are called to, more deeper activism with things like protesting, or in my case, I've been arrested 20 times for nonviolent civil disobedience. So I tell people I've been in jail with Jane Fonda and Martin Sheen and all those people. So but that's more what I'm called. But I so much appreciate other folks that are activists in other ways. And it's all of us together that's going to bring about this change. It's not one thing that I do or one thing that you do. It's all of us, all of humanity coming together as one. And that's where we're going to see the change happening.
Yeah, and that's where we have to believe that this is where the human heart can respond at that global level, because it's all about safety. And innocently, even the people who are into division, they're into division because that's where they see safety. And how we can actually go to our potential to see safety together in diversity and in unity, that's the true safety. But that's the awakened safety, as opposed to the other safety, which is symptomatic. So Scott, I'm going to invite you in and also ask how much time we have left. But one comment I wanted to make is how we decided to end the volumes, because 1,000 pages is a lot. And we had to ask, how are we going to end this before Ken Wilber's afterword? And his afterword was about how we achieve a truly inclusive spirituality, which involves waking up, growing up, showing up, cleaning up, linking up, lifting up, all of the ups. All of us talk about all of the ups. And what we decided is that we would take the points from the conference that we did at Cathedral St. John the Divine before the UN Summit of the Future, because the Secretary General had put a call out to civil society to help in the input to the debate on the Summit of the Future and Pact 2030. And at the end of that day at St. John the Divine, there was a list that 100 participants made of what it takes to scale up to achieving what we're talking about. And at every one of those steps, it was this connection that you're all talking about between the heart part of it and the action part of it, because that's where the coherence is. But the final line, which we actually decided, because you're always looking at format when you do a book, was not to have it in the linear list, but have it centered at the bottom. And this goes back to what a couple of you said at the beginning. That line at the end of that list is, our work must be persistent and courageous. And I think all of you know the word courage comes from the word in French for heart. So that's how we ended before we turned it over to Ken Wilber. And what's interesting is we haven't known what's going to come from telling this particular story. 25 years of trying to move from the head to the heart in the world's religions. A lot is happening, frankly, much more sooner than I thought. I'm getting so many requests from all around the world, people, because 120 contributors, a lot of people to hear from. But I think we're going to have so many platforms to have this same discussion. And Scott, I'm so glad that you've been such a part of not only hosting this particular discussion, but every discussion that you host is a version of this discussion. So that's a huge kudo to you and Omashar and everyone else who makes Awakening World happen.
Well, thank you. And as always, I really enjoy connecting to our audience. I'm going to read a few more comments that have come in. And Diane and Patrick, I don't know if you feel comfortable, but if people want to reach you, do you maybe pop in the chat box while I'm sharing some of the things that have come in?
Sure.
How people can best reach you, what your preference is. And Susan's asking, how long does it take to write a book? Well, that's
Good question.
That's a big question.
That depends on the author, Scott. Depends on who's writing it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm in the middle of writing a book now, and I've been about 6 months at it, and I'm about halfway through.
This
is 4.5 years.
Yes. 4.5 years for the Anthology book. Wow. All right. Reverend Jeffrey writes, I love Ken Wilber, even though he is above my pay grade.
That's great.
The New Paradigm Network is expanding with the Lovolution. Absolutely. Connie Baxter Marlowe has put into the chat box Principles of Spiritual Activism from Will Keating and Cynthia Bricks. So thank you. That's a beautiful link. Grace Denise writes, to a woman being difficult towards me today, things changed when I said to her, I am sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you, which of course is Ho'oponopono. So thank you for reminding us of that, Grace.
Yeah, and let me mention Will Keating's article in Volume 1. He really asks questions about the future of interspirituality with regard to sexuality and intimate relationships, and with regard to the dimensions of psychedelics, both within and without of the human brain. He really asks some really serious questions. And his article is followed by the fellow who edited Father Keating's book on the points of agreement among the world's religions. And that's what he talks about is the future of the interspiritual milieu. So there's a lot of meat. And Will Keating has done a lot of that. And Cynthia, his partners, her article is on the future of gender relationships.
Beautiful. I'm going to bring Tiara up. She has hosted shows that we've done on interfaith, and she has been a real pioneer in bringing spiritual diversity into the educational world. So I think Tiara has something she'd like to share.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so inspired by this conversation, and one of the things that I did 30 years ago was I started a program called Spiritual Diversity in Education. And it was absolutely to get to the core of this. The interfaith was sort of the cover story, but to break it down to the essence of, what is that part inside of us, and that the schools really need to be addressing this the way that we do with the physical, mental, emotional. We need to be bringing the spiritual aspect of education into the public arena in a way that's safe and respectful, and in accord with the integrity. It encompasses, trauma-informed care. So I had a question for Patrick about the T. Did I hear you correctly? PTSD T?
I added an extra T in there by mistake.
Okay. Well,
I just tagged that in there for you, but yes.
I thought it might have been, comparative to complex PTSD,
Mm.
which is such an important thing to be
Mhm.
teaching our kids about that as well, and microaggressions and all the innermost, those subtle influences that make or break how we expand in our lives. So thank you so much for this.
And let me mention, because it's so relevant to this, the summit that we just did, and we reached 57 million people. We were so lucky with Rihanna Eisler on Peace Begins at Home, because her first cornerstone is what happens when the childhood experience. If that starts with childhood, it leads to an entire trauma related progression in life. And we aim to see that now with the Rob Reiner situation. And what I'm going to do, there's a free pass now to watch that entire summit. I'll put that into the chat. It's good until the end of the year. You can come and go. But there's a section in there by a woman at UCLA. And exactly to what Darren was just saying, she has these slow motion movies of the relationship of the mother and the child that actually show there's almost there is a telepathic relationship, that the child is moving its body in advance in anticipation of what the mother is about to do. And the point that she made is, when this is not there, that's the beginning of these subtle traumas, which then build this fear of separation and everything else that ends up haunting people for their whole lives. So it's just so important what you just pointed out. And while you guys are talking, I'll look for that link.
And while you're doing that, I want to point people to where you can do the best thing, which is let's buy this book, or both books. If you go onto Amazon, just put in Interspirituality, and they both come on up. And of course, the first book, volume 1, is The Heritage. And I'm just going to read some of the incredible authors that are part of this. The introduction is written by the Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, but also Matthew Fox, Wayne Teasdale, Thomas Keating, Ken Wilber, Joan Borysenko. It just goes on and on and on. Andrew Harvey, so many of the people. And of course, there's Diane, Berke, and Patrick. So there's the first book. And then, of course, the second book is coming right up. There it is, Interspirituality, The Future. And again, a really important 2-volume set. It is available on Kindle, or it's available on paperback. And please go to Amazon and buy it. We want to support our authors. We want to support this book and to really get it out there. So please do.
Yeah, and I just put the pass to the summit in the chat. That's good till the end of the year. I may talk to the team and see if they can extend that, because we're going into Christmas and New Year. But also, when you go to the general link that I gave you for both volumes too, that has all the links to both Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and UK, New Zealand, Australia, everything. We had to research all of those, because now that you can't mail anything worldwide because of tariffs, everybody has to order everything separately. So that's why we did that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at that time where each of you, one final thought you'd like to share tonight to wrap up.
Who wants to go first?
How about Diane?
I like what Joanna Macy says about hope. She says it's not passive. It's not sitting around and waiting for some deus ex machina to come in and save the day. That it's really about being clear on our intention of the world we want to see and live in, and taking action in the direction of bringing that to pass. One of my heroes is a woman named Etty Hillesum, who was a young Dutch Jewish woman in Amsterdam at the time of World War II. She wrote an extraordinary set of journals, diaries, called An Interrupted Life, that are really a description of her journey of awakening. And in the midst of the most horrific circumstances, she was in a transport camp that was a step before Auschwitz. And she wrote, "I know that a new and kinder day will come, and there is only one way of preparing the new age, by living it even now in our hearts." Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you for taking the time to be with us. And thank you for a lifetime, decades of activism and world service. Thank you.
You're one of my heroes, Diane.
Right back at you,
Your
Kurt.
turn.
Well, I'd first of all like to thank all of you who are here listening and participating. Thank you for that, and thank Kurt for pulling us together. You know, my favorite quote on hope comes from Pope Francis at the end of his encyclical Laudato Si, when he wrote that it only takes a few people with hope to change the world. And so I always encourage everyone to be one of those few people with hope. Sometimes it's difficult and sometimes it's challenging, but try to be those people that have hope enough to be the activists, to do what's necessary to bring about the change in the world that we see happening. But it could go either way. We've seen that throughout history too. And, you know, I'll be still here doing stuff. I'll be an activist. Diane will still be doing things. Kurt will certainly be engaged, and Scott and all the rest of us. So thank you for being part of a community with all of us, and a community centered around love, centered around hopefulness. And I look forward to the next time our paths cross and we can have some more conversations.
Yeah, amen. And Patrick's been so key to the recruitment of the authors in the volumes, and now in this recruitment of activities afterwards, which we didn't know what to expect. But
Yeah, just let me point out, Kurt and I are actually going to be on a podcast on Saturday in New Zealand. So the wonders of Zoom, that we can actually give talks in New Zealand. And
trying to figure out that hour where the 19-hour difference is.
It's beautiful. That's really
we might both be in our pajamas while we're doing the podcast.
What I'll say is, you know, this is what keeps me going. It's actually all these other people like yourselves who raise the bar high and live up to it. I mean, we know we're surrounded by people who raise the bar high and live up to it. And that allows us to put out all of this energy, where otherwise, like Paul Hawkins said, if you still have hope for the future, you haven't seen the data. But what gives you hope is when you have a heart. That's the other part of it. So that's what makes me, keeps me going. And my favorite quote then is actually from a marginal atheist, E.O. Wilson, where he says, "Evolution is optimism itself." And I've never forgotten that, because I'm an evolutionary biologist. It always makes the turn that serves the whole. So back to Scott.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. And again, I want to just bring up for all of our people that are watching on Facebook and YouTube, there's a wonderful link that Kurt provided, and this is a good way to kind of get all the information. So it's again lightonlight.us, and if you just scroll down a little bit, that's where you'll see our wonderful books here: Interspirituality, Volume 1, The Heritage, Volume 2, The Future. What a really remarkable accomplishment. And thank you so much, all of you, for your work. Kurt, always a joy. And I hope, Kurt, you're going to join us on Saturday night.
Yeah, just send me an email, and if I can hop in, that would be great fun to see John and Summer and all of you. It'd be great.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll have a double header, two Kurts in the same week. And speaking of Saturday night, again, the theme on Saturday night is going to be the light within, enlightening our world together. And the first hour is going to be kind of hearing from Kurt, John, and Summer Raymer, Chief Phil Lane, Heather Elizabeth, all about what's happening around this incredible weekend of enlightening our world together. We also are going to have Cornflower, who's amazing, playing music along with Omashar. So it's going to be a great evening for music. But we've got a couple of other special things planned. Dr. Kat Lewis has written a brilliant understanding. She's a scientist who has written a brilliant paper, if you will, on how the heart literally physically creates healing. And it's very inspired. Many of you know Kat from her previous times. She's been on the show. And so she's going to be with us. And then a very, very special, something that I just booked today, so it's not even on the main poster. But going back to Saturday Night Live days, how many of you remember Sean Jay, the magician? Well, Sean reached out to me. He said, Scott, I'm missing you guys. I have an opening on Saturday night. So Sean's going to join us on Saturday night to do some unique magic. And then, of course, we'll conclude the show, as I said before, with a memory of Jay Mayer. And I'm going to play, some of the things from Jay. And as a segue going into talking about Jay, during the time that he was working with us, he and his partner Jan, and please put Jan into your prayers, and we'll pray for her specifically during our prayer time tonight. But they created all these wonderful wisdom jewels, and almost every Saturday night they would have a different wisdom jewel, and I picked out one special one. So this was created by Jay and Jan. And so I think this will be kind of a nice segue into our prayer time. I think let's segue right into prayer time. And I'm going to stop the recording so that we can have privacy in a moment. But I'm fine with keeping the recording going right now while we pray for Jay Mayer as he transitions and has transitioned into the next world, the higher world. I also pray for his partner Jan and her precious heart. She found Jay, ironically, in the bathtub, similar to 6 weeks ago when I found my land partner in the bathtub. I guess there's a new phrase, death by bathtub. So, anyway, blessings for Jay and blessings for Jan. Maximum grace for Jay Mayer. Maximum grace for Jay Mayer. Maximum grace for Jan Kaplan. Maximum grace for Jan Kaplan. We will have a closing song from Omashar, but I'm going to turn it over to Tiara and Desiree.
Thank you. I'm thinking about those sacred waters of the bathtub and the sacred waters of the womb, to come in that beautiful space. And, may all transitions be gentle. May all transitions be full of ease and grace. The transitions go into those subtle microaggressions when we move from one state of being to another, whether it's in our waking state, walking into one room from another. And may we become more and more sensitive in ways that perhaps don't hurt so much, but yet to have the courage to continue to be sensitive in this world, to show the way, to feel the way, lead the way.
Thank you. Utakapaki sarakareto sorogita saraketa saraketa sorokora sireketa saraketa sorokura sereta karasareta serekoroto surokada sadasa. Just seeing, taking some of that denser energy and just transmuting it for the collective. Utakareta sarakada sara, very gentle, as Diara said. Utakete sereketa surokura serekara sereta sarakara serekara serekara sarakara serekadasa. Iserekarata saretasa. Finding the joy and love in the community. Takarata serekarata serera, where we speak our truth. And we give and receive in balance. Tukurakara serekara sarakara serekaretu take serekitasa. Beautiful.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. Blessings for everybody. And to conclude our evening, here is our beloved Omashar.
Walk this way again. Lay down all your guards. Your loving hearts will lead the way. The door is open. The wonderful and the new is waiting patiently. Take a step and you will see all you've been dreaming. You're my creation, the wonderful and the new is waiting patiently. Take a step and you will see all you've been dreaming. And now is the time we've been waiting for so long. I've been holding you through all ages, knowing I'd be with you once again. You'll never walk this way again. Lay down all your guards. Your loving hearts will lead the way. The door is open. And now is the time you've been waiting for so long. I've been holding you through all ages, knowing I'd be with you once again. The door is open.
Got us on gallery views. We can all send lots of love to Omashar and Desiree. Thank you, everybody. And again, remember, we've got a lot happening this weekend. Please plan on participating in as much of enlightening our way together as you can, especially Saturday at 4:30 p.m. And we've got Saturday night, our regular showtime at 6 o'clock. Sunday, a very special Sacred Sunday show, 11 o'clock in the morning. I'll send out an email to everybody with, and I actually sent one out yesterday. I'll send out another one with some of those details.
Thanks to our amazing guests tonight, Scott. Holy smoke. Brilliant.
Oh my gosh. 3 people who have dedicated their lives, decades of service. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Kurt.
Yes.
Thank you, Global Peace Tribers. And let's see what happens on Friday with 3i Atlas, and we'll all talk about it on Saturday. Take care, everybody. God's blessings and good night.